Today, we're opening up some really fascinating sources that track, well, one of the most remarkable economic journeys of the last century.
That's right. We're looking at India's policy framework, how it evolved.
Exactly. From that really centralized state planning, designed for almost total self-reliance,
Hmm.
through that huge shock of the 1991 liberalization, and then kind of tracing how those massive structural changes hit everything, from high industry right down to the daily life of a farmer.
Yeah, our mission today is really to trace this evolution of intent. We want to map the institutions, starting with the Planning Commission, the engine behind the five-year plans,
Right.
all the way up to today's policy think tank, NITI-IOG.
Okay, so before we dive in, maybe we should pin down what we mean by economic planning in this context.
Good point. Essentially, it was a systematic organization and use of resources by a central authority.
The central authority. Okay.
Yes, to achieve some really big socioeconomic goals like raising the standard of living, tackling mass poverty, unemployment, those kinds of things.
And this was all happening within what they called a mixed economy, right? That term gets used a lot. How did that actually work on the ground? I mean, private companies existed, but was it truly mixed?
That's a great question, and it really gets to the heart of the pre-1991 era. It was mixed, technically, but the state was definitely the senior partner. It set the rules.
And the rules were strict.
Very strict. Which brings us nicely into that first phase,
Yeah.
the era of central command. The objectives were pretty clear-cut. Rapid economic development, yes, but also, and this is crucial, economic self-reliance.
Self-reliance. They really wanted to cut dependency on outside help.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially for essentials like food grains. It wasn't just about growth, it was fundamentally about independence.
Driven by those ideas of economic equity, social justice, and this push for modernization.
Exactly. And this strategy, well, it reflected that desire for control. You had the Industrial Policy Resolution of 1956, which really cemented the dominance of the public sector.
Right, this socialist pattern.
Yes, adopting that socialist pattern, prioritizing heavy industries, steel, dams, big infrastructure projects. The state aimed to control the commanding heights of the economy.
It's fascinating just how much control they exerted. We know certain industries were total state monopolies, arms, atomic energy, railways.
Non-negotiable monopolies of the central government, yes.
But the sources also highlight just how closed off India was from the rest of the world.
Oh, absolutely close. Before 1991, the average tariffs.
Well, they exceeded 200%.
Wow, 200%.
Yeah. It's a staggering number. It tells you everything about the priority given to protectionism, to building things domestically, almost regardless of efficiency.
200%. It's hard to even imagine that level of economic isolation today. That must have created some, well, strange situations for consumers and businesses. Sheltered, but maybe stagnant. Precisely. It did achieve some goals, like building a foundation, and crucially, self-sufficiency in food. The early Green Revolution success rested on this, but it also bred massive industrial inefficiency, distortions in the market.
And eventually, that inefficiency just became unsustainable, right? Leading to the crisis that forced their hand.
Exactly, which led to the great pivot, the big shift.
The new industrial policy of 1991, this is where the goals just fundamentally flipped.
Completely. Suddenly, it wasn't just self-reliance. It was about boosting industrial efficiency to international levels, speeding up growth, and critically, integrating India into the global economy.
So a massive change in direction. What were the immediate concrete steps they took?
Well, the most dramatic was probably dismantling the infamous license Raj.
Ah, yes, the license rush. Can you just quickly sketch out what that meant for, say, an entrepreneur before 1991?
Sure, it meant needing government permission for almost everything, starting a factory, expanding, even changing what kind of goods you produced.
Yeah.
It required permits, often dozens from multiple ministries.
Sounds like a nightmare. Years of delays.
Years of delays, bureaucracy, and unfortunately significant potential for corruption. So abolishing industrial licensing for nearly all industries was, well, it was revolutionary. From permission needed for everything to permission needed for very little.
And they didn't just stop at deregulation for private companies, did they? They also reduced the state's own role in industry.
Drastically. The number of industries reserved only for the public sector, it plummeted. From 17 back in 1956 down to just 3 or 4 today. Mostly things like atomic energy, certain minerals, rail transport.
Okay, so less state control, less red tape. What about foreign companies?
That was another huge shift, liberalizing foreign direct investment, or FDI.
Yeah.
This was monumental.
How so?
For the first time, multinational corporations could come in and invest up to 100% in certain sectors. They could actually hold a majority stake. That sent a massive signal. India was open for business, technology, capital.
And what about India's own big companies? Did anything change for them?
Yes, they tackled the restrictions on large domestic firms, too, by amending the Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act, the MRTP Act.
What did that do?
Essentially, it removed the limits based on company size, the asset limits. So these big Indian conglomerates no longer needed government sign-off just to expand or merge.
So it unleashed domestic competition as well.
Absolutely. It wasn't just about tweaking a law. It forced these large, often complacent domestic giants to shape up, modernize, and compete, suddenly facing not just each other, but efficient global players too.
Okay, so looking back at this period, the shift is just immense. From 200% tariffs and state control to embracing markets and foreign investment. But managing such a radical change must have needed new institutions, right? Did the old Planning Commission survive this?
It did, for a while. It sort of lingered for another couple of decades, carrying on with the five-year plans, the FYPs.
And we shouldn't just dismiss that whole FYP era, should we? They did achieve things.
No, definitely not. Especially in the early decades.
Yeah.
They laid crucial groundwork. National income growth picked up significantly compared to pre-independence. And, as we mentioned, that boost in food grain production was vital for the Green Revolution. It built a foundation.
The final plan was the 12th plan, ending in 2017. Its theme was something like faster, sustainable, and more inclusive growth.
That's the one. But by 2015, the decision had been made. The Planning Commission was seen by many as, well, a relic.
A relic? How so?
Suited to a command economy, perhaps, but not the liberalized one. Too centralized, too top-down. So it was replaced by Niti Aayog.
The National Institution for Transforming India. And its role is fundamentally different.
Yes. Niti Aayog is explicitly positioned as the government's main policy think tank.
So less about making the plan and more about advising on policy, recognizing that central planning for such a complex economy just isn't feasible anymore.
Precisely. The big shift is in the approach. The old Planning Commission was often criticized for being top-down, sort of dictating plans to the states.
Right.
Niti Aayog tries to be bottom-up. It emphasizes cooperative federalism, involving states actively in setting priorities and formulating policy. It's a different philosophy.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, let's pivot slightly. Let's talk about agriculture. It's still the backbone in terms of employment, right? Around 60% of the workforce.
Still huge, yes.
Yeah.
Even though its share of GDP has dropped quite dramatically.
From over half at independence down to, what, under 20% now?
Around 18.5%, yeah. Which is typical for an industrializing economy, but that decline masks some really deep, persistent problems within the sector itself.
Problems leading to low productivity.
Exactly. Really low productivity. And the reasons are layered. We can think about them in maybe three buckets. Issues with people, with tools, and with the rules.
Okay, let's start with the people issues, the human element.
What you have widespread challenges like lower literacy rates in some rural areas. And then there's the sheer pressure of population on the land.
Meaning farms just keep getting smaller.
Yes. Constant subdivision and fragmentation. Land holdings are passed down, split among heirs, until you have these tiny, often uneconomical plots. Hard to farm efficiently or scientifically.
Okay, that's the human factor. What about the tools, the technical side?
Still a huge dependence on the monsoon. Only about 40% of agricultural land is reliably irrigated. Many farmers still use very traditional methods, old implements.
And credit. Access to finance.
That's a massive one. Lack of access to formal, affordable credit forces millions of farmers into the hands of informal money lenders, the Mahajans, the Shahukars.
Right, charging incredibly high interest rates.
Exactly. It traps them in cycles of debt, making it impossible to invest in better seeds or irrigation or equipment.
Okay, so people, tools, and then the rules, the institutional failures, these seem like the hardest ones to fix.
They really are. It goes back to the legacy of land ownership. The average farm size is tiny, about 2.3 hectares. That itself makes mechanization tough.
And historically, the systems were exploitative, like the zamindari system.
Yes, where the person actually working the land often didn't own it and paid huge rents to an intermediary landlord, the zamindar. Land reforms after independence were meant to tackle this head-on.
The slogan was, land to the tiller, right?
That was the aim. Eliminate those exploited intermediaries, give cultivators security, and also make land use more rational. maybe through ceilings on how much land one person could own.
So how effective were these land reforms? Did they achieve land to the tiller?
Partially.
Hmm.
The abolition of those intermediary tenures, getting rid of the zamindars, that part was actually quite successful across large parts in India.
Really?
Yes, the legislation was passed relatively quickly by 1952 in many places, and the sources say it brought something like 2 crore cultivators, 20 million people into direct relationship with the state. No more zamindar in between.
Okay, so that's a significant win.
A huge win. In fact, our sources highlight that the abolition of the zamindari system is pretty much the only land reform measure that was fully implemented in many areas.
The only one. So the other land ceilings, tenancy reforms, they largely failed.
Generally, yes.
Yeah.
They often got bogged down.
Yeah.
There were delays in passing the laws, which gave large landowners time to find loopholes, like registering land under relatives' names. Some provisions were optional, not mandatory, and frankly, there was often a lack of political will to really push them through against powerful landed interests, sometimes coupled with bureaucratic inefficiency or corruption.
So the deep institutional problems, tiny farms, insecure tenancy in some cases, lack of credit, poor infrastructure, many of those persisted despite the reforms.
Largely untouched, yes.
Yeah.
Especially the fragmentation issue.
Right. Which brings us to a really interesting, almost paradoxical part of the story. The 1991 reforms were meant to liberalize the whole economy. The expectation was that this would finally end the historic discrimination against agriculture and lead to a boom.
That was definitely the hope, the policy expectation. Remove the barriers, let the market work its magic, and agriculture would flourish alongside industry.
So what actually happened after 1991, when the market was theoretically unleashed?
Well, contrary to those expectations, agriculture saw a performance deceleration.
The slowdown.
A clear slowdown. This is where those persistent institutional failures really hit hard. The growth rate of agricultural GDP actually fell. It was over 3% per year in the 1980s, but dropped to around 2.38% in the post-reform period.
That's significant. What about crop output?
Even more dramatic. The growth rate of total crop output just plummeted. From over 3% in the 80s, it fell to barely 1.18% in the later period.
Wow. And that presumably affected food availability too.
It did. Per capita availability of food grains declined. So why? Why did liberalization, which seemed to supercharge industry, leave agriculture struggling?
That's the core question, isn't it?
I think it boils down to this. Market signals alone couldn't fix broken institutions or water-dry fields. The post-1991 era also saw a relative decline in public investment in things crucial for agriculture, like irrigation, rural roads, research. The focus shifted.
Towards the industrial and service sectors that were growing faster?
Exactly. And the private investment that poured into industry and services, it didn't flow into agriculture in the same way. Why? Because the underlying risks were still too high.
The fragmented land, the dependence on rain, the poor credit access.
All those institutional barriers remained. So you could say the economic reforms were primarily industrial reforms. The fundamental agrarian institutional problems, they were largely left unfinished.
So summing this up, we've traced this incredible journey from an economy obsessed with self-reliance, willing to accept 200% tariffs and state control, to a liberalized one, banking on market forces and foreign capital. Industry clearly benefited, accelerated. But agriculture, because those deep-seated institutional issues weren't fixed, actually struggled and slowed down.
It paints a picture of immense structural change, absolutely, and a political transformation, too. Moving from that powerful central planning commission trying to direct everything to a decentralized advisory body like Niti Aayog. But as we saw, just changing the planning institution doesn't magically solve problems that resisted fixing for decades.
A really compelling story of transition, and one with ongoing challenges, clearly. The industrial integration was a success story in many ways, but that uneven impact is still very much part of India's reality.
It is. Which brings us to a final thought for you, the listener, to maybe ponder. We established that getting rid of the zamindari system was basically the only land reform that really worked widely.
Right. The only one fully implemented in many areas.
So given we know there's a clear link between tiny farm sizes, insecure land tenure, and that worrying slowdown in agricultural growth after 1991, how do these deep institutional issues, the ones that proved so politically difficult to fix 70 years ago, how do they continue to challenge even the modern, decentralized policy approaches of Niti Aayog today?